we really want to welcome you to this dialogue that we will have in Connectas about the bodies that sustain or finance the Chavismo. I want to remind you that this is a collective work between the ICFJ, Freedom House, and the ARI, Alianza Rebelde Independentista. We will have Alejandra Arias de Álvarez. She is an internationalist, graduated from the UCB in Caracas, and she has been appointed as an ambassador and a representative of Venezuela in Switzerland. We have the she is a journalist with vast experience that is part of Connectas Hub. We also have Christy Rangel, who has a PhD in economy, specialist in fiscal transparency and a fight against corruption. She's part of the Fulbright program as a research in the John Mason University. I want to highlight that this encounter is under the light of this article that has been issued regarding the bodies of Chavismo. And we want to remind you that you can write down your questions in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A session moment, so we can receive your thoughts and share with the different speakers that we have. So we'd like to start with the first question. It's directed to Lisette Bom. Could you please let us know who are the international partners that are backing up Venezuela? Thank you, Indira, and all the attendees that we have today to participate in this webinar that we have. When we had the idea of having this investigation, we were wondering what are the countries that have been becoming partners of Venezuela in the last few years. And we found that those are countries, we're talking about countries that are quite far away from Venezuela in Asia. For example, Russia, China, Turkey, Belarus, North Korea, Iran. And these are like the main allies that they have. And they are out of what we will say like the region where Venezuela is. And they are not part of what we would say the traditional trade relationships that Venezuela had with the United States, for example. And it was very interesting to understand what was happening behind the scenes, why these partnerships were taking place. And we found that they have many things in common. So they have this sort of hate towards the United States. They claim to be anti-imperialism, and there are countries that are in the top 10 countries with higher numbers of corruption. And also they are sort of against democracy. If we review, for example, the speech from Chavez since the beginning and all the relationships that started in his government, we would say that apparently they will follow that sort of ideology, having a big expectation of joining the different countries together to fight back imperialism that was trying to bring these countries down. But it was going far beyond this. And we found that there was a very quite active trade going on. And this has been helping a lot of the shortage that they have in this fight of the sanctions. Maria Alejandra, we see how Lisette has described the partners that they have. How do you think that all of these relationships changed when Nicolás Maduro access to power? I think that it went deeper. So first of all, I want to thank Connectas for having me today and say that Connectas have been always defending human rights. The first webinar that I was part of uh, was here in Geneva, and it was sponsored by Connectas. So I'm very happy to be part of today's encounter. I think that the key issue here is to have a perspective that will be broader. So, of course, what happened in the past will be reflected in what is happening in the present. So, how was Venezuelan politics before Chavismo? We were quite active, and we were supposed to be a country that wasn't biased towards US or Russia. We had a perspective that was quite nationalist. We wanted to see the development of the South. And this perspective and this ideology was translated in the different international relationships that we have, like in the United Nations. We were empowering relationships among different countries that weren't part of any of the two groups. All of these groups were derived or have like a similar ideology, but this ideology was quite close towards socialism. So we need to understand where we were coming from and how did we arrive here and what happened. I think, yes, it went deeper with Nicolás Maduro arrival. And I think that we actually identified new partners that we didn't have before. Of course, Venezuela had different shades, and it will go quite close to uh, Latin America and the Caribbean. That was a natural environment for Venezuela. Um, Also, we were quite big supporters of democracy uh, in the South, in Central America, and we received some military training from Germany and from the United States. So to understand the background, we need to see how that has changed. Now, Cuba has a significant role here, and Iran, China, Russia have a role as well here, quite significant, and they are sort of challenging the United States. Um, they are trying to mm, present an idea that is against what they have by creating strategic alliances among them. Maria Alejandra is saying that it is we need to understand the background to see where we getting to. So we're seeing that in spite of the economic sanctions that the U.S. government gave to Venezuela, the country is still up and running. So the question is, what are the keys behind sustaining the trade in Venezuela? Thank you very much, Indira. And I would like to thank everyone and all the attendees here. I'm very delighted to be able to share my ideas here. And actually, I feel very honored to take Omar's spot here. So before the question that you're raising, I think it's very important to highlight two moments that, as Maria Alejandra was saying, we had a previous history before Chavismo. So there are two moments. So if in the beginning with Chavez and after Maduro, and the relationships with China, Russia, and Belarus, they have been in place. And actually, they got together with China, not because of the ideology, but because of the effort that China was doing globally to expand themselves. This policy tried to expand themselves in many other countries. And in Latin America, Venezuela became the best way for them to penetrate the region. So the interest of Chavez since the beginning was to present this anti-imperialism ideology. But it wasn't like supporting China, but it was to be part of oil and gas business so they could maintain the accelerated growth that China has. When we talk about Belarus, they have had a very significant link if we understand they will to position themselves in Latin America and challenge the United States from the backyard. After all these sanctions, there was a critical moment, which means that they arrived when the industry was going backward. We're talking about mainly here oil and gas. It has been decreasing since 2008, and that was quite before the sanctions. And when these prices dropped in 2014, the crisis became quite severe, plus sanctions. So what happened? So this is where they start knocking different doors with countries that have been well experienced with sanctions and they have been able to overcome those. And this is how these countries that have had this kind of issues with the Western world, they know how they can flip the coin and they can get a benefit from this by increasing the trade with the countries that are going through similar situations, in the case of Venezuela. And they are just trying to show how could they evade or get around these sanctions. How could they position their companies, their products, and be part of businesses that weren't part of their portfolio in this place of the globe. This question I would like to direct it to Maria and Cristi, and it's related to the negotiations that they're having in Mexico between Maduro and the opposition, and that will have the accompaniment of Russia and the Netherlands. How much does it weigh the relationship with Russia and Turkey with the Chavista government? What do you think? Well, I would say that it's quite soon to say how it's going to be this dynamic. Also facing the situation that we have with the United States and Afghanistan. That is changing a little bit the game with a global context. So having this in mind, we might need to think about United States coming towards Russia or vice versa. So we need to understand how this will work with China's interest, which is part of this policy that has been announced by them a long time ago. And they are trying to conquer new markets, flood new markets, actually, after this massive growth that they have in the past few decades. Now that has stabilized, and the only way that they can continue growing will be through exports. So with United States exit from Afghanistan, we see that that is a very interesting path for China to consider this as part of their trade route and also for the extractivism, because we need to remember that Congo Republic and Afghanistan are basically economies based in minerals, illegal minerals. So if we take that into the equation, something could be happening. Like we can see some tension between East and West. And as a consequence, that could alter the scenario that will be taking place in Mexico. I think that this dynamic is quite ongoing. Okay, thank you, Maria Alejandra. Cristi, what do you think about this? Actually, I think that there are different perspectives towards this issue. One could be a little bit optimistic because Russia could be interested in the political stability in Venezuela. And they are aware that at the moment that is not the case, that there are some conflicts of the regime and that can impact their interest in Venezuela, in particular, the great investments that they have done in the oil and gas sector. There's an analyst that says that the situation in Venezuela could improve, and that would be an additional factor to take into account. Some others say that China and Russia, all these countries that are quite significant internationally, they might be taking part of the negotiations that would take place because they have significant interest there. I don't know if we're going to have a balance towards Madurismo or Chavismo. I cannot say anything farther. I think that maybe the countries will be willing to safeguard their interests, and they might reach an agreement to reach a political stability in Venezuela. What do you think? I'm thinking about a little bit about the investigations that you did with Connectas. Could you please explain me how this new diplomatic act got shape, and what is the interest that they have in Venezuela? So as Maria Alejandra was saying, we need to go backwards in history before Maduro. Where did these relationships started? Because we had some visits from Iran, quite important people came here with the aim to strengthen the relationship. And we understood that there was part of the speech that we had from Chavez, for example, to increase the trade of cacao or some other industries. We see here that behind all of this, there was an interest to see some of the deficiencies that we have at the moment in Venezuela. We can see that there is an exchange between a country like India, because maybe it doesn't fit entirely in all the characteristics that we have mentioned before. They do have democracy, but they do have corruption there. We understand that they have come to solve their shortage on medicine. And this exchange, it's medicines by oil and gas. And in the last year, we need to say that this exchange, we are seeing not only this, but also petrol. So we are seeing also the case of Iran. At the beginning, those were agreements or some conventions that will be related to agriculture, but now they are providing fuel to Venezuela. We used to produce fuel here, but here we don't have any kind of credit, or we don't have any sort of mechanisms that or structures that are part of what would normally have a fair trade between two countries. You can see this. Nothing is helping to the economic development of the country, or we are not resolving any kind of conflict that we have in Venezuela. So, for example, Turkey, it's quite interesting. Erdogan was one of the last representatives that came to Venezuela, and this exchange was based hold by flour. And those were some of the commodities that we used to bring from United States. So that enabled to other countries to see and have this access to this basic good. But for example, gold is part of what is an item that has been exchanged, and we are exporting oil, but now we are also including this other commodity, the gold. And all this issues raise the concern of having traffic of gold towards Arab Emirates. They are exchanging gold by luxury cars. So this is what we are seeing. This is like an exchange. This is the nature behind these relationships that they are having. Please continue with the answer that Lisette gave us about the benefits that they have got. How key do you think it's been for Nicolás Maduro this economic alliance with these partners like India, Russia, or Turkey? Without a doubt, that has brought a significant benefit for sustaining the regime. There has been a change from Chavez, because they were trying to find this ideology activities aiming to change the partners intentionally, but we weren't going through an economic crisis. Uh, so we had to look only China, Russia, and we were also having this sort of friendship in Central America and South America, facing the negotiation that will take place in the United Nations or the OAS. After Nicolás Maduro, we are in a quite different economic situation. And I want to point out here that prior the sanctions, we were having a lot of shortage of different commodities, also because many of companies that were expropriated by the government that had a terrible impact over the economy, and also all the decisions that impact the private sector in Venezuela, and all this decline of the industry. So between 2014, 2016, these alliances with these partners became quite significant when we got sanctions because they were the mechanisms in place. We had had some negotiations before, and sortearlas was the reason why the expertise of these countries that have gone through sanctions was quite significant. So, for example, if I talk about the bank where Venezuela and Russia are partners, that was useful for some transactions in the exchange with oil and gas. Then that bank received a sanction by the United States as well. I mean, China was using that to send the petroleum to Asia. Then India appears not having a sort of ideology related to this, but it does have a quite significant economic interest over Venezuela. When we talk about Turkey and Iran, we see that it comes closer to having a common ground over the ideology and maybe some dirty business, some exchanges of commodities that are not legal, some performances that are not legal either. So in this perspective, we can see how Iran, Turkey, and maybe other country, the other one that we have as partner, Syria, we see a different kind of negotiation where the interest is quite different to have non-legal exchanges going further than having a negotiation over commodities or oil and gas. As Lisette was mentioning before, when we talk about gold, for example, is sanctioned, and there is an illegal business running here, not only for the sanctions, but also for the way that this has been extracted, that is violating all environmental rules and all the rights in the territory. Thank you, Christy. We're going to continue with making a pause for some questions that we have got through the chat. So let's start with Abril Mejia's question, and she's asking, how is the relationship with the rest of Latin America with all this partners of Venezuela. It's in the Chav allies uh, adjective. So yes, precisely. What was one of the issues that we wanted to explore? How was the relationship of these countries with the rest of Latin America? And we saw that surprisingly is quite old. The main partner of this country will be Brazil. Venezuela is not, I mean, it's in the top three, but it's not that significant. Um, Besides India, there we are number one with different sectors, as I told you, for medicines. But for Russia or Belarus or Turkey, we are not the most significant economic partners. Brazil will be more significant. Also, for example, for Russia, India was a country that was part of this economic bloc where we had this significant expectation around year 2000, but at the end of the day, they didn't become as uh, as big as we thought or as we were forecasting with them. So Venezuela is not one of the main partners for them. We're talking about Russia, Turkey, Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Iran. Alejandra, would you like to say something? Yes, I think that the role of the BRICS here was quite significant here in the exchange that we had in the past few decades among uh, countries that call themselves BRICS. I think that that uh, helped them to become very significant commercial partners. And this is why we need to highlight here Brazil. Presence of these countries for Brazil, Russia, China, India, they do have a quite close relationship with Brazil. And the size is quite different from the rest of all the other countries in Latin America. And as I said before, in China or in Africa, they have done the same in Latin America. They have been trying to penetrate the different markets in different ways. I was quite shocked. Not that that long ago when I was understanding the relationship with the Colombian trade, actually China has become a very significant partner for Colombia. So we are talking about here that that's part of the economic agenda for China. So we shouldn't be surprised to see some other Latin American countries there. But as we were saying before, they do have this relationship with Venezuela, but they do have some relationships, and those relationships have been positioned quite well in the Latin American market as a whole. We see, as Marilena was saying, uh, or sharing with us, China strategy. Could you please share with us your thoughts about this and how do they want to penetrate our markets? Yes, I want to point out what we did from Transparencia Venezuela, some Chinese business that they just uh, increased the demand of the local industry. So at the beginning, Venezuela was the first beneficiary of loans from China, at least until year 2014. I think that we were having good prices for oil and gas. We were having good production, and we were able to pay those loans with no problem. That changed completely, not only towards Venezuela. First, they stopped lending us money when we weren't able to cope with our debt. But then China changed their strategy towards other Latin American countries because they didn't want to pay loans, but they wanted to invest. I research in Mexico shows that in the past 5 years, the investment in infrastructure from China in Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia have been massive and quite significant or more relevant than the ones that they have made in Venezuela. So have uh, we have been left behind. We used to be the receiving the benefits of this relationship, but now is quite different because always the investment has been going towards other countries, and for Venezuela, it would be translated into loan. At the moment, we have a huge debt towards China. We have been trying to pay through some exchange with oil and gas. There were some conditions that we need to have. We need to have no relationships with Taiwan, maintain all the contracts as confidential, guaranteed uses of Chinese companies in Venezuela, and so on, so on, so on. We accept those. But at the moment, we cannot see the same in some other countries. So from the ideology point of view, they have had a different kind of negotiation process in Venezuela. Because yes, we received these loans, but under a lot of different conditions. And we don't see the same sort of investments in infrastructure and other sectors as we see in other countries. And also the projects that we had with them is contributed towards the debt that we have with them. And some of the projects didn't finish actually, and they didn't help to uh, improve the development of the country. I have another question here from Luis Quero. He's asking, why many institutions are trying to have a negotiation with the current president? Why they haven't been able to have this transition? I wonder, Maria Alejandra, if you want to have this question. By democratic transition, we need to understand that here we want to go back to the rule of law in Venezuela. And we're talking about a long and very slow process where there need to be a willingness, not only from the opposition, but from all the parties. So that's what they want to have from the opposition. Go back to all this world where we have this rule of law and we had all these values. This is not the case of the ones that are at the moment in the power. So it's quite hard to reach a negotiation here. So we can start a process towards democracy when they don't have the willingness because they are not interested to move towards democracy. Actually, because what we are seeing here, they do have support with some economic partners. Maybe there are some opportunistic or not. Regardless, they don't have like a significant reason to be interested towards a negotiation process. Okay, we're going to continue with our conversation, and later on we will choose some other questions from the chat. Please do see that recently Central Bank in Venezuela announced the start of a new system of finance exchange that's trying to promote the independence of foreign systems for the national bank's transaction. How relevant do you think is this towards the economic reactivation in Venezuela? Actually, this is just a part of what we will need to rescue our economy. Towards the same subject, I was thinking that the main problem is that we need to have a sort of different scenario in terms of the prices, in terms of the inflation, talking about the digital bolivar. We need to find a solution to see if we need to print again bills and coins, or if we're going to have the same problem in 3 years' time. So we should, or the government should, try to have a better discipline to become transparent in the public finances, in the budgets that we have to apply macro-fiscal rules, that they would be stopping having uncontrolled expenses that have led us into the situation that we currently are. So somehow I think that the interest is to have a benefit here over the economic activity, like just at the surface, right? That we need to go deeper and we need to try to find to reach a sort of a stability. We need to go back to the rule of law where we're respecting the private property. And we are seeing that the government is trying to be not that tight in terms of the price control that they used to have, and they have helped the economy. Nevertheless, the rule of fair prices is still ongoing. So what we have, there are some companies that are private and at the moment have been taken by the public sector. Uh, so to recover economy, we don't see the needed conditions. But we are seeing that the negotiations are taking place just with these companies that they have a sort of relationship with the government and they are offering different benefits. And these negotiations are kind of not interesting and they have the risk of corruption. So I don't see a clear solution to recover the Venezuelan economy because we are not seeing any sort of investment that will recover infrastructure, that will establish the environment of trust that you need to see the economy thrive. Basically, you're saying that we need to go and solve all these problems that are not on the surface, but in the depth, right? You said, could you please remind me if there is a partner that is more important than other, and what will be the reason behind this? Well, in this research that I did with my colleague from ARI, I want to highlight we found more than 1,200 agreements signed during the past 2 decades, involving a significant amount of money here, different conventions and similar. Christy could be sharing this a lot. Everything that has to do with tracking the number and the nature, the purpose of this conventions. And also, all of these are sort of confidential, so you cannot disclose all the details behind of these agreements. Nevertheless, we found that China is the main partner for Venezuela. And they came to substitute for calling so the United States. So that has been inversely proportional. So as Venezuela is moving farther from the United States, it's coming closer to China. And that was the situation until we reach a significant step with them. And let's say that all of these agreements needed to be frozen or stopped. Now that we have this exchange of petroleum, we are paying this debt with oil. And also this trade with China, receiving a lot of products from China, where they massively participate from every sector. But China is the main partner for Venezuela, for the United States. Maria, on the long run, these relationships that Venezuela has with the different partners, as you were saying, China, you think they are sustainable? Yes, sure. Even once, if we are able to finish this dark period of Venezuela and we move towards a better period, with democracy and so on, I think that they are quite sustainable because the market has been completely penetrated, and there is a relationship already established there, and these agreements, they didn't have a due date. So one of the parties will have to say that they want to be out of this, and they will have to start a new negotiation process, setting different kind of conditions. But I haven't heard, and I have to say it, some stakeholders saying or asking me that you need to tell the Chinese government, give a sort of guarantee that if power would change the party, nothing would change. So I actually have heard this. So the interest is precisely to get in line and trying to reach the stability, solving the sort of tension that we have, and we have seen in the past as part of this political narrative where they are saying, yes, Venezuela, if Chavez disappeared, then everything disappears. So all of this hypothesis towards the partners, we have had this with all the countries trying to reach stability and say that business are business. And I want to go backwards to something that I just said before. Maybe this is quite specific. We were founders of the OPEP that help us to defend our interest in the oil and gas industry. That help us a lot. But who are part of the OPEP? Those are in democracies. The ones that are part of this are autocracies. Our commercial partners, these cartel prices, those didn't have democracies. So when we're talking about businesses, actually, Brazilians like to say, call this like variable geometry. So you're going to have a relationship with the one that is like-minded, and that you have a sort of commercial interest. I don't think that they are going to finish, but I think that they will go within a framework of rules that at the moment we don't have. What sort of financial system have they created in Venezuela? And how do they influence the fact that the regime can be sustained? We are talking about this system where we can see that there's quite dual, and it's hard to understand, for example, the negotiation. How much or how expensive is for the people in Venezuela all this exchange that we're having. So for example, I'm having gasoline with this and that price. We're paying gold or we're paying cash, and we are not clear on what are the conditions that we have behind, what are the underlying conditions of this. So we have a sort of parallel system that is enabling business among the ones that are making the trade, and is making it easier. And they have very particular benefits. So the people of Venezuela, we are owners of the oil that we have in our territory, but this government is the intermediary, but they are not being held accountable. So for example, in my opinion, I think it's quite interesting to know whether the subsidies for petrol that we don't have, now we pay $0.50. This $0.50 per liter, does it cover the cost that we have made by buying this from Iran? So what we have in place at the moment is that everything is possible. We don't have a counterweight here. It's quite possible the abuse of power here, the abuse of authority. So Hugo Chavez was a path to withdraw all the controls, to decline all the institutions that would guarantee the stability, that will guarantee accountability. All of this was banished, that was completely erased, abolished. So we had a scandal in the academy, we have a scandal in different organizations, but it didn't matter because we had a lot of money on the streets. But now that we're suffering the consequences, we cannot change it because now we don't have any democratic tools to make a transition in the power. And this is why we see all of this crisis. So the background that we have, in parallel in how the economy is working, is giving a benefit clearly for only the ones that are part of the government, but that doesn't include the people as such. Related to the previous question, I think that we can keep having relationships with other countries, but having the right institutions in place that would explain why the Odebrecht projects were finished in other countries, but in Venezuela they weren't finished, and why the businesses with China, we can see that they have been finished in other countries, but they are unfinished in Venezuela. So we can see here that this uh, lack of institutionality in Venezuela is hurting the people and is bringing a bad impact for us. Thank you, Christy. We're going to hear from Lisette. We see that some of the findings from the research Chavismo bodies is that you could see this price increase and the shortage in the whole country. Now the markets are full of foreign products thanks to this exchanges that they have been having. The question is it profitable to be an ally? Yes. So what I was saying before. So these countries have a similar situation in terms of their institution and things like that. So they share the fact that some are becoming richer while all the rest of the population is becoming poorer. So it's profitable for our country to become a partner, surely, but it won't uh, be shown in the whole population. So this is why they have this sort of partnerships, so they could have actually apply everything that has worked somewhere else. So, for example, all of this sort of mechanisms that they have had of non being accountable, non having transparency, non having any sort of controls. And this is what we see is quite profitable for them. And as long as this would be or have a significant economic interest, you can review the whole paper in the Connectas website. As the song says, this relationship will remain, or this love would endure until the business is done. Because at the end of the day, these relationships are quite pragmatical. Precisely, Lisette, I think that you are saying until the love would end at some point, right? When the business is not profitable anymore. So we're going to pick some other questions from the chat. So we're going to have Miss Michelena question, who says, with this dialogue, we understand that the economic future seems to be in a mortgage. Do you have an idea of how long and what will be the price of this mortgage in accordance to what Luis is asking? Christy, would you like to take this question? Yes, we have a tremendous debt in our country, not only with the debts that have been already issued, but actually when we were having the good times, we actually got in debt even worse and worse. Um, and this has been documented by different economists. Uh, it had everything to do with the political cycle that we had, this situation that we have at the moment. And we have this mortgage, sort of mortgage with different countries. And this is the reason why you might have some of the politicians here who have the interest to send a sort of tranquility part saying that many of these commitments we acquired before 2016 with this lack of institutionality that we have, but they were legal. After 2016, where we are not uh, acknowledging the parliament and all of the negotiations that have been held afterwards, then it's difficult to understand the situation. But I think that if we could move forward in the negotiation that will help us with a peaceful transition where we will be able to give guarantees uh, to the ones that we are in debt, and we can have the support from third parties so we can establish our situation and our debt situation, we will be able to overcome the dramatic problem that we have at the moment. That this had everything to do with changing the political stakeholders here, because we see here the behavior of many years. There is an interest for following different macro uh, fiscal rules. Um, so we're talking about transparency, we're talking about institutions. So I think it's possible to get a recovery, but we need to have a change or a transition on the political sphere so we can reach to have a different sort of institutions from the ones that we have at the moment. Marilanda, quite short, could you please uh, let us know? We can see that some of our attendees is asking, how do you place in this scenario the castrismo? So what happens with Cuba? Cuba is a master. They have taken by the hand Venezuela during the whole process, and Cuba has been the advisor of Venezuela for the United Nations, and that, so we can see clearly how Cuba has a significant role favoring Venezuela, so it could be effective, the relationship among them. So we can see that there's a key role in Cuba with these partnerships that they have established with Venezuela, with other countries. And actually, at the end of the day, all of these partners are the ones that are that have helped the regime to be sustainable. I think that Cuba here is the political partner, top number one political partner of Venezuela. Thank you, Maria Alejandra. Let's move forward to another question from Maria Soho. She's asking, how has been this, has been the relationship with Venezuela during the pandemic? Yes, Russia and China, which is this Chinese allies, they have been supplying the vaccines. We're talking about the COVID-19 vaccines. So in Sinovac and Sputnik. At the beginning of the pandemic, we could thought that we were getting the tests, also the fast test, They arrived and they were the first that we start using. But these tests were rejected in many other countries because they weren't quite effective. They weren't reliable. So we received those here as a donation. And that was possible because of this alliance that they have. Now we're talking about the vaccines, and we have been receiving this shipments of Chinese vaccines, lack of transparency in this. We don't understand this. It's quite dual, obscure to understand the negotiation behind this. But yes, we could say here that in Latin America, the countries that have gotten one or the other vaccine. So what lab have served or have preferred to trade with a country or the other. So we can understand this and have an idea of what is the link underlying the relationship with the countries. Thank you for your attendance. We are aware of the time, so we would like to continue with some of the questions that we have for our speakers. You see, we can see that one of the conclusions of this research of every bodies is that different agreements and conventions with autocratic partners have been translated with the translation, but that hasn't helped to recover the national economy. The question is, what are one of the reasons why this recovery hasn't taken place if there are that many alliances? Yes, actually these alliances, as the document was stating, um, they, these alliances are not aiming to have any sort of recovery. They're slightly are thinking to have a relationship between the different ports. But they are not talking about infrastructure or investments that would enable a recovery of the economy. In 2019, where we had a significant electrical shortage during March, we heard that China will help to recover the power industry in Venezuela, but that wasn't the case. This project, even though it was announced, wasn't materialized. So the relationship are just between ports, imports and exports, and it's quite painful to see that we are import products that we could produce ourselves. We have analyzed, for example, sugar industry, and we used to be the manufacturers for the local demand, the domestic demand. We have a fertile lands for this, for sugar cane production, which is not the infrastructure. But in this relationship, there isn't any sort of interest for recovery or help the industry or anything like that. We just want to have an exchange, a trade. So once the petroleum has been sanctioned and all this milestone for exports, government has been starting from picking everything, for example, mining, also in a quite dual environment, but they are not empowering the domestic economy. There isn't any interest to help it to get recover and get in shape. This is what we have been showing in the report. So there is just an interest to have a trade, but there isn't an interest to help the country as such. So the more recent efforts of openness and negotiation, it seems like they have a sort of concern to rescue the domestic industry. Nevertheless, this desire to have everything like behind the scenes and so on doesn't give the guarantees to have serious partners to move forward. Before wrapping up, I have a last question for Lisette and Maria. We can see that among this new diplomatic access, we have countries like Syria or Iran that represent or that they have uh, instability situation. So does this represent a threat for Venezuelan government, Maria? Not at all. Syria has been in war for about 10 years. They have a lot of human rights claims and nothing has happened. In spite of that, the regime is still ruling. And something very interesting, some of the victims that I know, human rights problems there, that you wouldn't see the shortage that you will see in Venezuela. 7 years since the war started, they wouldn't see the same levels of shortage that we see in Venezuela. So Syria will maintain their Iran same. They have been through this unstable environment for many years. So I don't think that this is going either to change or impact Venezuela. I don't see that happening. I think this economic recovery, to just add on this question, I think we will try to reach a sort of stability from the economic point of view, even though we are not seeing that. We are not seeing the productive apparatus to have any sort of recovery. We're just seeing some merchandise coming and going. So we want to find the right mechanisms to have this happening and start moving and helping the productive apparatus. We are quite far away from this. But if we are able to modify anything like this, surely the economy will be number one, non-ideology or politics. Lisette? I am not an expert on this affair, but I agree. I don't think that they would take any sort of consequence. For example, Iran, they have had economic sanctions years. They have projects for having different projects with uranium. It has sanctions by Europe and by the United States. Syria, they have a civil war, and I don't think that that would have any sort of impact. They have maintained themselves there. And I was saying before, uh, when we had Hugo Chavez, and when he started having the relationship with American president, all the agreements will be towards agriculture and industry. But now with Maduro, we have moved towards oil and gas and other commodities. So I don't think that that would have an impact. But as I was saying before, maybe there is an interest to have a sort of stability just to maintain business, not because we want to support democracy or want to improve the lifestyle. No, we just want to help the business to take place and create a better environment for it. Thank you, Lisette. Let's look towards our final thoughts. So starting wrapping up here, I think that we have many significant items here. 1 minute. What are your final thoughts over this? What is the main takeaway from this dialogue so we can share with our attendees? Thank you, Indira. I think that is very important that all of us should value that democratic institutionality. Also, we need to value not only to have prosperity as we had at some point in ours, while we were having this weights and counterweights. At the moment, we are sort of not feeling quite hopeful with democracy, but we need to fight for that to bring back those values to the institution and the rules, not only from the economic perspective, but also the political. We need to award the governments that are performing well, and we need to sort of punish the sort of governments that are not performing well. And we should have relationships with other countries having respect, and that is valid with any country, but that with a background where the citizens or the economic interest of the whole people would go first than the ones that are in the power. So we can have this on the long run and solve all these harms that we have had, um, and recover all the damages. So I would say that we need to recover our institutions of the democracy and transparency. We need to our fight against corruption. I'm part of this organization, and I see that this the corruption is the axis of all these relationships and the links. So citizens go first, right? Yes. So Maria Alejandra, your takeaway, please. Mira, I'm not that optimistic and Christy. Um, I think that even in darker scenarios, we need to be hopeful and to understand that processes will take time and that we are understanding the situation of Venezuela has become a chronic illness, and that won't happen overnight. That would be a long process, and we need to be quite disciplined. We need to remain in the fight. So my takeaway is we need to remain in the fight. It's going to take time, but we need to understand that this is step by step, having our mindset in the goal. Thank you, Maria Alejandra and Lisette. Your takeaway? I think I want to invite everyone to reflect upon uh, the sense of dysfunction. Venezuela and its allies. Because if we have a look at the other side of the coin, sanctions had enabled Nicolás Maduro government to have negotiations, and that is one of the demands that he has. He has that desire to avoid those because that is impacting him and his government. But also, um, we have to bear in mind that many of these countries have been able to flip around this sanctions by having partnerships among them. And at the end of the day, I think that sanctions have promoted the illegal activities. And to evade this uh, sanctions have created different routes for trade, uh, different from the traditional routes. So they have found a way to get around this. And I think that we need to understand this role, and we need to see whether sanctions are quite efficient as uh, an effective measure for these countries, for these governments that are not in line with democracy, that the corruption is quite widespread. Um, that is very interesting to see all your points of view. I think we start thinking a lot, and all the ones that would revisit this. Thank you very much for being part of this dialogue in Connectas about the allies that sustain the Chavismo. We had Lizeth Bond, Titi Rangel, and Maria Alejandra Aristeguieta. We want to thank the support of the ICFJ, Freedom House, and the IRI, Alianza Rebelde Investiga. Um, on my behalf, I want to thank your attendance, and I want to tell you that in the chat you're going to find a survey that we want to encourage you to fill out. We want to remind you that your opinion is very significant for us. Thank you very much.